So joining in the panel there with Dr. Ignatius Mabasa. Is he still a doctor or you're not a professor? Oh. He's the winner of numerous awards as a Sarungano in multiple genres. He just had it for himself. He has several novels, children's books, poetry, and short stories to his name. He also lectures at the University of Zimbabwe. Dr. Mabasa, welcome. I did read your book, I'm not a Shona speaker, but I tried my best and I enjoyed it. So, thank you. The next one to join on the panel is Tariro Ndoro. Is she here, Brian? Oh, the last time I saw her, she didn't have this hairstyle, so that was just after I launched your book. So I'm busy looking for you. Welcome, Tariro. She's a Zimbabwean writer and poet and storyteller. She received an MA in creative writing from Rose University down there, Eastern Cape, Gqeberha. She's the founding editor of ikai.com. Yeah? Did I pronounce correctly? Yeah. An online poetry journal. Her stories and poetry are found across journals and anthologies. Her debut poetry anthology won the National Arts Merit Award for Outstanding Poetry. We do have her works here. You can purchase her books. Everybody who's here, most of the writers are here, they've got their works, so please do buy and support our local writers. Thank you, Tariro. And I'm told, and then we have Tinashe Muchuri. Tinashe, everybody doesn't know that Tinashe is a poet, is it? Except me. He's an award-winning author, translator, editor, actor, journalist, and poet. You'll be reading from his also coming novel, Harare. Tinashe. Thank you. And Nyasha Melissa, please come through. Nyasha Melissa is also part of this panel. She's a short story writer and blogger whose short stories are in Chiyanike published. Turquoise Dreams is an anthology of short stories by Zimbabwean women. Some of her writings won her awards. She's also a spoken word artist and essayist. She strongly believes in the power of storytelling and currently serves as senior editor at Think Africa, promoting grassroots storytelling in Africa. She's currently working on a number of stories. Nyasha is a medical student at the University of Zimbabwe. She's sick, guys. People do amazing things. Yet we think doctors and lawyers are not supposed to be reading our novels, but they are the ones who are reading and writing. Thank you. So at this point in time, if you allow me to hand over to our moderator, and we'll kickstart the conversation. I think we have to share the mic. At least Bachara is getting us a second mic, if we can. Over to you.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Derek. Although I have problems with you calling me a critic, I don't want the writers here throwing stones at me.
Yeah, you are a good critic.
Yeah, so welcome everyone to the first edition of the Harare Open Book Festival. And we hope we'll all have a good time here. So our first discussion or panel discussion is the unveiling of the theme. Who came up with this theme? It's probably me.
We have been looking for years now.
So I'm told our theme is united through our stories, and I think it's very important that we have these conversations regarding our crafts, or however you view it, our narratives, our passion, whichever word you'd like to use. So I feel very honored to be part of this highly esteemed panel of different writers, writing in different languages, writing different forms of literature. My first question to the panel would be, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the theme "United Through Our Stories"? So I don't know whether we're going to go person by person, or whoever feels the need to say something will say what they have to say.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here and seeing Samantha. I haven't formally greeted her, but and also writer friends. Very interesting, united through our stories. I think probably as somebody who was, and I'm not ashamed to share this story because it is a very key part of who I am as a writer. I started telling stories before I could read or write. This is when I listened to stories that my grandmother told me, and then I retold those stories. But in the retelling of those stories, I started spinning them, jazzing them up, playing around with them, knowing that they will not break. Actually, I wasn't aware of what I was doing. I was just trying to retell stories as I had, heard the stories, but then sometimes I could not remember all the details. So then I'd find myself, sneaking in bits and pieces of, whatever I made up as I went along the way. Now, what you notice is these were stories that belonged to my people, that were told by my grandmother. They later on became my stories because I took those stories and I did what I did with the stories. And the result was something else. So I was creating from what had been created, but then bringing in new dimensions. And I think I have continued doing this, and I remember at one Zimbabwe International Book Fair in Ndaba, I nearly got stoned because there are people from the Ministry of Education who were telling me, you, Mabasa, what are you doing with our folk tales? I had shared then one of my modernized folk tales, Radio Yatsuro, where Tsuro buys a radio, takes it into the forest, and causes chaos in the forest. So the conservatives were so angry. And yet here I was saying, no, look, why are you angry? Because I have, done what I, have done with the stories. Because I believe our stories have not always been static, and they will never remain static. They respond, and they must respond to social change as they go along. If they fail to respond to social change, they will die. They will become irrelevant. So when I look at this, Madam Chair, when I look at this, topic, I then ask myself, what is it that we call our? Who is the our in the stories? Because we have stories. You may have a storyteller like me. I'm still, very good friends with Tsuro Nagudo. I love Tsuro Nagudo. I draw inspiration from Tsuro Nagudo. And I love, stretching Tsuro Nagudo into, spaces that they never knew. Now, if you can, you can find my Tsuro Nagudo on Twitter, and they are having the most, crazy conversations about pizzas and ice creams and all that. the whole idea for me is I am trying to make sure Tsuronagudo, or our stories, the stories that I got from my grandmother, the stories of our people, can actually endure and remain relevant as we go into this, globalized village, globalized world. Who are we? It's our identity. They carry our language. They carry our beliefs. Most importantly, they have something that you cannot even really pin down in terms of the use of, idiom, the way they think. Their ideologies, they embody who we are. So then, when I then talk to younger generations, they'll say, yeah, but Tsuronaguda, are they still relevant? Do they still have a place in modern day, culture? I think they do, because they are our stories. And, the same way, we should not wait for Disney to appropriate, like they did Simba the Lion and all these other, great folk tales. Did you watch Tango or read Tango? That's not an American folk tale. So they are appropriating tales, doing amazing things. But we, the owners of these stories, our stories, just looking at them and saying, oh, I wish I could have done this and that. So when we talk of our stories, I don't know. I know what I call our stories may not necessarily be Tariro's stories. Because one last thing that I'll say is I had a friend, she was participating, there was a writers' workshop where we were pairing UK writers with Zimbabwean writers. Now, she wrote a brilliant story, sent it to the UK mentor, who was a published writer in the UK. The writer's comments were actually, I don't know the right word, sometimes this is why I think I've language. But so this UK mentor then reads her story and he says, no, your story is not African enough. I don't see the animals. I don't see the villages where there's, with huts, where smoke is billowing up. This is too cosmopolitan. I don't like it. Can you write something that's African? That's you. Tariro, what do you say?
Okay, that's an interesting take. The strange thing is when I saw that theme, it seems that you've really focused on our stories, and I focused on United. But I'll comment on what you've just said, because I also, a lot of the short stories that I write, I've been writing a lot of fairy tale retellings, and I sent it to, funnily, an African author who lives in the UK, and she said, I'm tired of these tropes. These aren't our tropes. But, as someone who was born in the 90s, I think I consumed more Disney than Tsuronagudo. Okay, so I like that Dr. Mabasa calls himself a Sarungan, because it's something that I've seen people are starting to call themselves. And, for a long time, people thought of writers and authors. And, now that there's this trend of Sarungano, it makes me think of what the place of a writer in a society is. And when I think about united through our stories, 3 anecdotes come to mind. And they're not going to make a lot of sense when I first say them, but towards the end, I hope that they do. So back in the day before I was published, I used to like going to poetry readings, and I used to like reading poetry. Funnily, I don't like doing that anymore, but I remember I recited a poem and it was about abuse, and someone came up to me. I'd never met him in my life. I have never met him since. And he told me a story of something that had happened similarly in his life, right? And in the second anecdote, I went to a different poetry reading and I read a poem which is one of my favorites about political upheaval in Latin America. And this was in South Africa. I didn't really expect anyone to connect with it on a deep level. I thought people would connect with the intellect of it, but not the heart of it. Afterwards, a woman came up to me and she said, I was one of those women who were tortured during that communist uprising. And it didn't make sense to me because I was like, wait, I'm in South Africa, I'm a Zimbabwean person. I recited a poem that was written by an American woman, but someone who comes from Latin America has come to me and told me that the exact same thing happened to her. And then in 2017, I was writing, and a lot of so if you're a writer, you'll know that it's a lonely business. You write by yourself. When you're at the book launch, when you're at the Indaba, we're all together like this. But when you're writing, you're by yourself with that blank page. And I remember I was writing stories, and for a long time I wasn't a name yet, so I didn't know what my readership was. I went to Blawayo for a reading, and someone came up to me and she said, I love your stories. My brother and I are reading what you write. And so when I think about united through stories, it's one of those very abstract things that as writers, we write alone. But we sort of have this calling of the Sarungano, of, back in the day, back when people lived in villages, you would go to your grandmother told a story. Maybe she was telling that story to entertain you. Maybe she was telling that story to teach you a lesson. But somehow the fabric of community was woven through that storytelling. And I think, nowadays, because, you can download a book on Kindle, you go to a reading, a bookstore, you buy a book, and we forget that it unites us. So I could read a story that's written by a Ndebele person, and as a Shona person, that gives me a perspective that I would not otherwise have. As, a young woman who is trying to navigate adulting, I could read a story by another woman and see that, oh no, like all these things about, maybe office politics, love, hate, family, someone else is going through that. And I think it unites society in a way that we can't always quantify, but is very important for our societies.
Thank you. Thank you. I started by whistling, though it is instrumental, and you cannot find this word anyway, because it started from this space and from somewhere where I was connecting with nature as a cattle header, heading my cattle in Unyenga Mountain, somewhere down there in Masvingo Southeast in Zaka. When I came across this title, where I went to was the word stories. There was united. I started with the stories. Then I saw the united part. And then I saw the through part. And then I said to myself, okay, these are our stories. Where can we find our stories? Then I got back and said to myself, I used to listen to stories of many people from many spaces, from many places. When they came to consult my grandpa who was a healer. So he would tell them stories about things, but he would start by looking at some bones. He threw the bones and he would start to say some words like handitaurirewe ndinotaura nambuya vangu vamadhuve zvishongo vakadambura dembe pamarise chikiti makande chitukwaradzima chinengwena mabwedzi vachigova. And I'll say, what is this man saying? Later on, I learned that there is a place called Mabwedziva, and then he would say Mabwedziva Chigova ni Ramapokore. And then I also discovered that there is also another place called Ramapokore. And then as I go on deeper and deeper, I discovered that this place is actually a sacred space. And also discovered that they say it is an association with marine spirits. Then I was surprised, amazed. How can this man who was in Zaka speak about something that is happening in Chiredzi down there in Chilonga? My mind started to wander. Where are our stories? How can we be united by them? Then about 3 years ago, I was called by the Spanish embassy. They said, we have identified you as a storyteller. We want you to tell stories from Spain to little children in Harare and Marondera. And these stories, we will also want you to search for equivalent stories which are written or which were told in Shona. So I had, it was a simple task, just read the English translated stories. Then I said, okay, so there's also another one here, this one and this one. And then I started to discover the similarities of the experiences of human beings, the similarities of dreams of human beings, the similarities of imagination of human beings, and even certain spiritual rituals of human beings. And I said to myself, so how can these people in Spain, somewhere there in the far corner of the end of Africa, near the ocean, think the same with those in Zimbabwe, here kune kanyikawo kakangovharirwa kasina kana negungwa rimwe chete? Then I said to myself, when I see the theme, united through our stories, that human beings are just the same. We may be different in the geographical settings, places where we stay and where we live. But our stories, our experiences, the things that we come across, the things that we talk about, there is also someone who is experiencing the same things. And by telling the stories, we may discover that we are providing therapy to someone at the other end of the earth, or at the other space of a spiritual realm, or at the other space of a physical position. So that's what I thought about. And when I started by whistling, when you are whistling, you are also listening to stories from the birds. As I speak, there's also another bird which is also speaking to me, and which I am listening to. And as I walk through the path, through nature, enjoying the beauty of nature, then I will be also listening to the stories that the nature tells me.
Most of what I wanted to say has already been mentioned, but as I looked at the theme, the word that stood out to me is stories. So when I look at the word stories, I think of different experiences and different things that each and every one of us has seen. So I believe that to each and every one of us is a unique story, and it takes a little bit of courage to share that particular story. So when I look at the theme, United Through Our Stories, it gives me the idea that when we share our stories, we get the opportunity to empower different people around us, because at times you experience something and then you feel like it's so unique or it's so impossible, but then you get to read a story by someone else in a different place at a different time who's been through the same things as you've been through, and you see that they're not so outrageous. So in that way, I see stories as a way of empowering each other, encouraging each other, and in that way, we're united to each other through our stories.
Okay. Thank you to the panelists for their perspectives on that. I think it's interesting that all of them have highlighted the importance or the power of storytelling. And I was happy that Dr. Mabasa mentioned our history of oral storytelling as a people, the passing on of stories from one person to another. I mean, people still do it through gossiping, tabloids, and whatnot. That passing on of stories from one person to another or from one generation to another. When I saw this theme, what came to mind was, does being united through our stories mean that as writers, as poets, or as storytellers, we have to speak with one voice? And what does having one voice actually mean? Because for me, when I look at it, storytelling is about telling the truth. And be it in the face of a revolution, there can be controversies that, why is Dr. Ignatius Mabasa quiet about this? You know, so many things are happening in the society. Why is he quiet about this? But in being united in our stories, there is also finding your voice in that community, finding your voice in that situation or in that circumstance, and your voice is the truth. So does being united through our stories mean that we have to speak with one voice?
So I think when we're united through our stories, it does not necessarily mean we have to speak with one voice. As you have rightly mentioned, we still have to be authentic to our stories. But then the unity part comes in terms of respecting each and everyone's story and coming to an understanding of where their story comes from. So that's what I would say on that point.
You mentioned the issue of one voice, and you mentioned the issue of truth. Someone will ask you whose truth and which voice. And then when we look at storytelling, it is what I have observed that I want to, and what I think is relevant, what I think is relevant, and what I think should be shared. And this means I have choices as a writer. I cannot be everything, everywhere. I have a space that I occupy, and I want to stand for that particular space. So I cannot be spread everywhere. So one voice, yes, of course, we should speak with one voice, but each, on that voice, each and every person should be heard. When people are singing as a choir, you will see that there is a bass, there is alto, there is tenor and the like. So this is the same with the voice. You should also remember that this one stands for this, and this one stands for that, and this one stands for that. But when you collectively look at the voice, you will see that it is actually a single voice, because it's all about good for the humanity. Thank you.
Sure. I think my short answer is no. No, we cannot. I think it's not so much that we shouldn't speak in one voice, but we can't. And the reason for that is that we are different. And I think part of celebrating humanity is celebrating the differences. And, understanding, someone like Tinashe Muchuri, he's kind of grown up seeing his grandfather with the bones, and that's his literary lineage, right? And someone like Dr. Mabasa has grown up with his Tsuru and Gudo, and that's his literary lineage. And when we try to write with one voice, we then try to write one story, and that excludes so many other stories. And I think the beauty of art, not just writing, but whether it's singing or painting or whatever, is that we have that diversity. And the minute you say, let us speak with one voice, it's then whose voice are we speaking with? And if it's my voice we're speaking with, then it means that we have silenced his. And the only way to have a cohesive society is to understand that we are not all the same. I mean, I think we've all grown up in Zimbabwe, but we've grown up in different Zimbabwe. Someone who's grown up in Chiredzi is different from someone who's grown up in Bulawayo. Someone who grew up in the 80s is different from someone who was born in 2006. And I think our strength is in having all those voices. And I think I like that choir analogy, because when a writer speaks, I think at times we like to have famous writers and put them on pedestals and then say, this person is now speaking for all of us. Charles Dickens speaks for all of England, and he has that space. But I think when we start to think of writing as a conversation, that I can walk into a space and say, this is how I feel about democracy, right? And that's an opinion. And someone else can come in and say, no, I feel this other way about democracy. Then everyone's voice gets heard, and our collective national voice is reaching.
Unogona. An anthropologist once visited a village, and he asked to see the chief. He had a wonderful conversation with the chief, asking all the questions that he had about the chief and his people and everything. And when he had finished talking to the chief, the anthropologist reached for his bag, pulled out a gift, gave it to the chief. And the chief looked at the gift and he said, "What is this?" The anthropologist said, "It's a radio." And the chief said, "What does it do?" And the anthropologist said, "Oh, the radio. It tells you so many stories from different places all over the world. It sings wonderful songs from all these diverse places. There's news, there's weather reports about, big cities and all that." And the chief said, "You can keep your radio, because I have so many stories about my people, from my people, that I've not yet heard. I need to listen to the stories of my people first, understand them, internalize them, and perhaps I may then listen to your radio. But what the chief was actually running away from is an old idea from Karl Marx, where the ideas of the ruling elite become the ruling ideas, and where the voices of the subaltern, which is, what she was talking about, voices of those marginalized people. So imagine we are here writing and telling all these fantastic stories, but tiri kunyorerani, tiri kutaurirani. Because we may write so many wonderful stories, but we can exclude people, because of the language. We can exclude people because of the medium that we choose to use. Are we packaging our stories, as books? And the people that we want to reach, can they read? I was saying to Tsitsi Dangarembra not so long ago, I'm so pleased that Neva's Conditions is now going to be in Shona, because I think that was probably what it should have been in the first place. Get the message and tell the story about all these poor women who are out there, who have a story to tell. But once the story has been put in a different language, it becomes inaccessible to the very same people that you want, to read and share. And then those who get to read, they're just sympathizers. Oh, poor woman. And that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your perspectives on that. Thank you for your perspectives on that. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that there are different languages, different forms, and different audiences, you can call that, for certain work. In conclusion, I'm just going to ask you to respond to two questions. As a writer yourself, who are you writing for? I'm taking that question from what Dr. Mabasa has said now. Who are you writing for? And the last question would then be, we are seeing all these different types of mediums coming up, different languages, different kinds of writers, different kinds of poets. People are moving from traditional, what are considered to be traditional forms of writing, and how best, in the spirit of staying united, or ensuring that the purpose of the work that we're doing continues to exist or is fulfilled, how best can we celebrate, or how best can we harness our differences as writers, as poets, and that would be the last question for me.
All right, so for the first question, who am I writing for? Honestly, I'm tempted to say I'm writing for the next person to empower others, all that flowery stuff. But then at the end of the day, I do it for myself, because writing is really liberating. At times you feel a certain energy within you, a certain motivation, and it's relieving to write. And I would also say writing is empowering on my part. I would give, for example, just being here, sitting with these great people. So yes, I do it for myself, but I also do it with the hope that it brings positive change and positive impact to whoever comes across my work. And then for the second question, you said, how can we harness diversity as writers? Did I get that? Or celebrating different writers? I would say it's important that we encourage each other to share our stories in our indigenous languages. I've noticed that there is a trend, especially in the younger generation, to have some sort of negative attitude towards our own indigenous languages. If you try to write in Shona, people will give you different names like Godobwari because you want to use Shona a lot. But it's important that we remove all those stereotypes against our own indigenous languages, and we encourage each other to tell our stories in our different languages, in our different ways, our unique stories, and we respect all those things. That's what I have to say.
I write for readers. Yeah, I can't say I write for myself, because for myself, the story will be with me. The story will be everywhere I am. The story will walk with me. I will dream with it, and I will laugh with it. But when I put it onto paper or wherever I put that story, I will be doing it for others to enjoy or not to enjoy. So when I write, I write to converse with others. So to me, writing is a conversation with other people who were not part of the experience that I encountered, or others who had encountered the similar circumstances or situations and experiences, for them to see maybe how I came to solve it, or I failed to solve it, and wish to continue trying to solve it. So I write for readers. And with the last question where you talk about those who write in other languages, I write mainly in Shona. And when I said I want to continue writing in Shona, one of my friends asked me, "Who are you writing for? Who is going to read you?" And then I answered her stubbornly and said, the first reader is me, because I have the story and I'm writing the story. But I'm also writing for one other reader. And now, for us to harness these differences, the diversity in our stories, the best thing is to develop a culture of translation, like the one that Dr. Mabasa was alluding to, when he said they are translating nervous conditions into Shona. So the best way is to translate those Ndebele into Shona, Shona into Ndebele, Namibia into Shona, into Dao into other languages, so that we can share the richness and diversity of our stories. Thank you.
Okay, sure. I think I like to write for misfits. Anyone is welcome to be in my readership, but I think the type of stories I tell, I think misfits connect the most with them. And then in terms of welcoming people who are writing in other forms and other languages, I think it's difficult. And you know, when I say that, because I can see ways in which it can be done individually, but I also feel like it's a collective thing. So on an individual level, I would like to think I share other writers' work. You know, if they're writing in other languages, I want to share people's work on Twitter. I want to, you know, share people's work on Facebook. Something that we've done at Ipikai is trying to have, you know, Shona editors and Ndebele editors to welcome people who want to write in other languages, so that they do have that platform. And I'm glad that you spoke about Ndao and Nyambia, because I'm also like, we also have Tonga people in our country, we also have Kalanga people in our country, and people always forget them. We like to say, you know, where's the Shona books, where's the Ndebele books, but I think we have 16 official languages, and I'd really like to see all of them represented. But I think the real power would be with publishers and bookshops, because a lot of what gets to be read is what's in a bookstore, and if a bookstore doesn't feel like your book will sell, they're not going to put it on their shelves. So I think it's also something that we as writers have to put pressure on, publishers, and put pressure on bookstores to say we want to see our languages reflected on your shelves. And the other one is for people like you who are reviewers. I'll call you a reviewer because you don't want to be called a critic, but books fail or succeed not because they're good, but because of the amount of noise that's made about them. So it's also about other critics also reading different forms of literature, they're reading different languages of literature. And if not, then what are we doing as a community to open up that space?
When I started writing, I remember it was poetry, and I can say I was just following the flow of emotions, just trying to find an outlet such that, the poetry was so intimate, I didn't even want to share it with, with readers or with whoever wanted. I would get cross, because I would feel like somebody is intruding into your, this is, you feel like you are making yourself vulnerable, and people are, so when some of the poems got published and now they're, you try to be clever when people ask you, so what exactly were you, what inspired you to, you're like, should I tell them, no, then later on as, I branched from poetry into prose, writing my first novel. I think my first novel was a result of, me responding to trauma. I had an uncle, former, he's late now, Liberation War hero, liberation fighter, came back from the war. He had moments where, things were just, he would just, either just have outbursts, or he would start saying things, just like where we are now. Samantha, okay, ona mandiyo, unofurwa, tiza, him. And, so this, I was, a young man then, but trying to understand this behavior, and you have, adults telling you, those was zvinoita vakadzoka kuhondo, so pane zvinonetsa zviri kuda kuzogadziriswa. So he was traumatized, but I also was traumatized. And I was trying to make sense of all this, and I started telling a story, which later on became Mapenzi. Trying to understand him, and also trying to help myself, make sense of this man that I'm supposed to relate with, but I am failing because he has too many layers and too many moods and emotions and dimensions to, he's no longer the guy that I knew before he went to fight in the war. He's something else, something that I can't even, So I then just felt I needed to tell it. So I was telling his story, but also trying to help myself. I guess probably this is why, Mapenzi probably was successful. I was so sincere. I just said, look, I must say things as they are, and how I feel, and how I'm seeing things, and all this confusion that's happening around me. So it's somebody talked about how we, I think it's you talked about telling the truth. So I was telling my truth. But then you find there's a problem that happens when you write a first novel and it's successful, and then you have writers coming to you and telling you, yeah, we need another story from you.
And suddenly you are so much aware that you are no longer writing, and the process is no longer the same as when you were when you wrote your first works. You are suddenly so conscious that there are critics. You are suddenly aware there are editors. There's an audience. And I know of friends who tell me I'm writing for this award specifically. So you start seeing people shoehorning, forcing their creativity to speak to certain awards, certain themes, and this creates challenges. So if you ask me, I write, I just tell stories. But when I wrote my thesis, it's an autoethnography. One thing that I shared, and it still humbles me. I was walking in town, and then this woman stops me, and she says, "Makadi zvenyu ndiregererei, ndimi vaMabasa." I said, "Yes, it's me." And she said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, when you wrote that story called Ndafaire, you were telling my story. I said to myself, you must know me from somewhere. It's my story that you had everything in that. Oh, thank you so much. You don't know how much it helped me. And then, so many other stories. But coming back to your last point, I think, how do we celebrate our diversity? We need a revolution. And Bob Marley said, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and any other inferior is finally and permanently abandoned everywhere, it's war. We cannot all be Dambudzo Marechera. He was an exceptional, creature, but we need a revolution. We need to decolonize the mind, and we need to celebrate who we are. Nobody can beat us, or let me say, nobody can beat Muchuri at who Muchuri is. But Muchuri cannot pretend to be somebody that, he's not, and be successful. Azite, aubudirire. This is why you find Macheso has his own way of playing the guitar. Jimmy Chimombedi, his own style. The same with, the Bundu Boys, Thomas Mapu, Tuku, signature tune. So, but when you see us struggling to, fit into certain categories and certain ways that have been hewed, yeah, we have a challenge. And Dopatino Fira Ipapo, as, Dr. Chiwaura used to say, Takajikisco, to Noda Burutsisko.
Thank you so much. This has been a very interesting conversation. I think I'll take just about 3 questions from the audience if there's anyone who would like to ask the panel a question, so that we just round up this beautiful conversation. We would have gone on and on and on and on until at the end of the day, but we need to have other indavas or discussions. So if you can show by the raising of your hand if you have a question for the panel.
Thank you so much for the panelists. Very educative and also picking our minds and forcing us to think about what is happening. My question can be answered by anyone, but it's a question that I've been asking myself. It looks like we have this huge battle that we are fighting. We could be passive or active in this battle of trying to ensure that our children put Shona on a pedestal where it belongs. Because all the other vernacular languages, someone says we've got 15 official languages. But there's this thing about looking down on Shona or the vernacular languages. And we have high profiled. We love our children to be speaking, grandchildren and children who are primary school going, to be speaking in English as if that means something. And I think it's universal. Even in the villages, now we have creches or nursery schools where we have the children being encouraged to do Baba Black Sheep, you know, and we are forgetting we have our Shona lullabies. Oh, how can we talk to the AMA 2000s and the young parents that Shona is the language? All the vernacular languages, they ground our children because that is the culture and that is where we get our value system from. So we need to socialize the children right from when they are on the lap in our vernacular. How do we fight this battle? There is a battle.
This is interesting. I was having a conversation with a 27-year-old niece of mine. She's visiting from the UK. She's home. And she's been asking questions that I remember she never used to ask those questions. What I'm beginning to realize is, yes, as parents or grandparents, we may think we are being sophisticated and doing our kids a very big favor, you know, by, you know, say, you must be fluent in English, it gives you lots of opportunities. But it is something that at some point in their life is going to actually haunt them. Because then they realize, like this young woman, she says, you know what, I'm beginning to realize who I am. And I want to be, you know, the African that I am. I'm in the UK and I meet a lot of, you know, I have friends from all over. Some of them cannot even speak a word of their languages. But the thing is, you realize they are dead in a way. There's something dead in them that they are looking for, and they will not rest until they find that. You know, when we go into the global village, this globalized world, you need to go with an identity. Who are you? Because this is the point that I was, you know, trying to. We are living in a Coca-colonized world, but we can never be Americans, because Americans are looking at us and they say, shame. I tell you, I have a friend. He was taught how to play mbira and marimba by Dumisani Maraire. He came to Zimbabwe about 4 or 5 years ago. He says, I just want to connect and understand. I play this beautiful music from Zim, but I've never been, you know, to Zim. And he was saying, oh, you know, I was interacting with a lot of Zimbabweans and young musicians, and what I realized is they don't realize how much of a treasure they have in their culture and heritage. They are struggling to fit into the, but we can tell, even the way we speak the English. Atisi varungu ende unotozviona, and you know, I remember one American rapper is like, you know, you guys, and of course there's you niggas, you know, the way you I want to go to bed. What's bed? And you know, we cannot pronounce and master the English idiom. This is why I said there was only probably one Marenchera who could, you know, do it. But for him, it was probably an escape mechanism from what I've studied and understood, you know, about. But Tirukura Sikirwa, we are hemorrhaging and we think we are okay. But we'll realize much later, especially when these kids start asking us very difficult questions. Why didn't you give me the opportunity to actually be who I am? And then I much later can choose to navigate and, you know, explore other. Identity is very important.
Thank you for asking that question, because I think it's something I always want to talk to older people about. That I've seen with my parents' generation. They grew up in the rural areas. And because they grew up in the rural areas, they understand Shona in a way that I don't understand it, because I did not grow up in the rural areas. And I think sometimes we expect our children to learn by osmosis, but we forget that You know, when you're in that household, you're the mother, you're talking to your child, you're the only person who's speaking Shona to your child. When they're going to school, they're learning in English. When they're watching TV, they're watching English shows. When they're reading books, they're reading English books. And so there first needs to be that understanding that my child is not going to learn from osmosis anymore. If you're in the village, you can, but when you're in town, you can't. And so therefore, now that you're in town, you have to think, okay, now that there's Peppa Pig, is there a Shona cartoon that I can make my child watch? Now that there is, I don't know, now that they're reading the Sunrise Reader, can I also buy them another book that's in Shona? So I think it's that intentional mentality, that actually understanding that when my child is at school, they're spending 8 hours a day with an English teacher. So am I going to step in and be telling them Gano every night? English parents, they have that story time. Are we giving them Engano time? So I think it's just about being clever, and then also, and you know, I'm not sure how this would work, but also then thinking about with content creators, with, you know, what's on ZBC, is there a way that we can actually push to say, are we funding that you know, that guy who's at Moto Republic trying to make the Zimbabwean Peppa Pig, are we actually funding him? Because that's where a lot of it is lying, that, you know, you're allowing your child to watch Disney, but are you giving them a Shona equivalent? Are you sending them to the village during Christmas holidays so that they see how their grandmother lives? So it's just all those little things that we have to be aware that we actually need to do them. We can't just rely on, you know, my child is going to learn.
Ipapa panoti shupei achitinedzei nekuti nyaya yezvikoro inoshupa. One day when I was trying to send my firstborn to kindergarten school, you know, we had a discussion with my wife, and my wife was saying, we have to send our child or son to an English-only speaking environment. Then I argued and said, no, we cannot do that. Because I understand that for him to fit in the world, he must have an identity. So his identity is Shona. So he must go to a place where he's allowed to retain his identity. Ndakazofara kuti ndakakundawo ipapo. Then later on he went to primary school, and in June, this June, we were called as parents, come and sign the documents for your grade 6 children who will be sitting grade 7 exam next year. When they, in our conversation with the madam there, she said to me, Muchuri, pano tine dambudziko. Dambudziko ndiredu nderekuti tine zvose zveEnglish izvi. Mabhuku kana mukalibrary kedu kepakona zvese zvirimo, ndinovadzidzisa neEnglish. Asi every year I have a problem. Because mwana wangu anoita ma15, asi ozoita 8 kushona. Saka zviri kuaffecta pass rate yake. Pass rate yechikoro nepasi inonzi mapoints ake anozo score at the end of the day. And also zomutadzisa kuwana chikoro kwaanoda kuenda. Can you please help me? And I said, okay, I've heard you. So let me run in different corners. And I also knocked at Dr. Mabasa's door and said, please, do you have any Shona readers? I want to take them to the school where my son is learning. And you see, this is a problem, and we are inculcating this problem in our society, and our children are suffering. They are failing to attend schools they are supposed to go because we say the other language is not important. Yet they also have an effect in their upbringing, in the development of their intellect. So we need to find a way to balance these language issues, where we also accommodate Shona in different, spaces in Ndebele and many other languages. Thank you.
Looking at your question, I think it's impossible to have a solution that covers an entire generation to say we're going to do this to deal with AMA 2000. But I think it goes down to you as an individual and as a parent. I feel like you can groom your child at home. Once your child understands their identity and appreciates their own indigenous language from home, then they can move out to the world with the confidence, and it's sort of impossible for them to then be shaken. And then also looking at this issue, I think it's a problem that happens in the education system. We have a lot of schools, in my experience from primary school right up to high school, I was at schools where you would be reprimanded for using vernacular. So I feel like it's such regulations in schools also that keep creating negative attitudes against our own languages, which is something that also needs to be looked at. And one last issue is the idea of content creation. So we need to have more content creators and more creatives using vernacular, and then in that way we can familiarize our children and the younger generations with our indigenous languages.
Thank you. Thank you to the panel, and thank you for that question. I'll then ask Derek to take back his mic. Thank you everyone for your time.
Well, more hands for our panel. They've just unpacked our theme, United in Our Stories. I would like to thank our moderator. I'm not going to call you a critic anymore. You are a reviewer. Rutendo. Dr. Ignatius Mabasa, thank you so much. Tariro Ndoro, it was a pleasure hearing your voice. Muchuri, Tinotenda Mauyao, and our rising doctor and author, Nyasha Melissa, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Harare Open Book Festival at Ella the Garden. Welcome, and I would like to appreciate our partners, Carnelian Publishing, represented here by Samantha Bajure. She'll be part of the next panel. You will hear from her as well. She's speaking from the publishing side. One of the young black women who are publishing. I mean, let's put hands for her. Thank you. So at this point in time, we're gonna have a reading. I think if our reader is ready, while our able panel takes their seats. Thank you so much.